Hey folks, Dr. Mike Israetel here for Renaissance Periodization, strength training myths number 4. You must train the lifts themselves if you're going to get better at them. Let's take a look at what's on deck today. The claim itself, we're talking about exactly what's being claimed here. We're going to talk about the benefits of specificity, and they're very difficult to overstate. Then we're going to talk about other less specific ways of improving strength. And then we're going to talk about what the best approach is. So the claim here is kind of like, look, if you want to get better at bench pressing, you got to bench press. It's a must. You have to squat to get better at it, and so on and so forth. No matter the lift, if you want to get good at it, people say you have to do the lift. Now, sounds like a duh thing. Like, of course you have to, but hold on a second. If that was true, if it was a definitive statement of you must do the lift to improve it, that would sort of get us in trouble in at least 3 scenarios. First, you're hurt and you can't do the lift itself, but you can train the muscles of the lift individually. So maybe your back hurts when you squat, but you can hack squat and you can do stuff like a deadlift, which are the 2 component lifts that sort of make up squatting. If that's the case, like, is it really true that no amount of hack squatting, no amount of stiff legged deadlifting and making those muscles and movements bigger and stronger will improve your squat at all? Like, that sounds kind of unlikely. What if you don't have access to the equipment itself to train the exact lift? For example, if you're a strongman competitor and you don't have access to a log for log pressing, but you have access to barbells, is it really true that like you used to log press 200 pounds when you were at a strongman gym years ago and you had the log implement? And now you're doing overhead strict presses with a barbell, 275 for sets of 5. Is it really true that like your log press hasn't improved at all? Like, fuck, I mean, if you can barbell strict press 275 for reps, gee, your log press is probably higher than 200 for a max, you would think. And then lastly, if training a competition lift, for example, like low bar squats, isn't sustainable for you because maybe it bothers your wrists, your elbows, your shoulders, your back, does that really mean you have no chance of improving your low bar squat at all, no matter how much other training you do, right? Are you just not going to be making gains then? It sounds suspicious because it definitely is. Now, before we get into why that's suspicious, we have to admit the obvious. Specificity is a really, really big deal. If you train the lift itself, that's the absolute best way to improve any lift, especially in the short term due to technique improvements. So yes, the lift is very good at growing muscle for its own performance. Low bar squatting grows all the muscles you need to low bar squat, but it's because of that neural pattern of exactly those forces that you need to exert in low bar squatting. When you practice it, your nervous system rapidly gets very good at what you're practicing. So if you have to get good at a lift quick, and just generally getting good at a lift, practicing that lift is irreplaceable. Absolutely, right? And there's real world consequences here. If your program, let's say you do legs 3 times a week, but you want to squat as much as you can. If you only squat one of those sessions, but you do like hack squats and then lunges on the other ones, if you took one or both of those sessions, took out some hack squatting and lunging and put actual squatting in there, just because of that specificity effect, you almost certainly would get a higher squat. All right, so there's a big grain of truth here. And if your program doesn't include the specific lift you're training for example, some of the older West Side programs didn't have deadlifts, even though they were deadlift specificity programs, you have to have a fucking damn good reason for not putting it in there, because it's the most obvious way to improve what you want to improve. Like, if you want to get good at deadlifts, deadlifting is absolutely number 1 on your list of shit to do. You can improve your deadlift without ever doing it, but you have to have a damn good reason, a damn good structure, and you have some explaining to do. Specificity is king, and the lifts are absolutely top contenders for improving the lifts. Duh. Now, it's definitely not the same thing saying that the lifts are the best and improving themselves, or even very good, is not the same thing as saying you can't improve without doing lifts, which is really what this claim is. It's an exaggeration. The lift itself is not the only way to improve the lift. As a matter of fact, there are a few basic ways in which you can increase the lift without doing the lift, and here they are. First of all, any lifts that make the requisite muscles bigger. By the way, I'm getting so jacked you can fucking hardly scratch my own neck. Don't get muscular. It's annoying for the rest of your life. If a lift is making the underlying muscle or muscles bigger, it's probably going to lead to better strength. For example, if you are squatting high bar, that requires your quads a lot. If you take your leg press and you go from doing sets of 10 with 315 pounds to sets of 10 with 455 pounds, maybe in some off chance, next time you go back to squatting, your squat's not instantly higher, but within a few sessions of practicing squats, shit is going to shoot through the roof like fucking crazy. And bigger quads will absolutely power a bigger squat, and anything that makes your quads bigger to some extent will improve your squat. It absolutely will transfer. Number 2, any lifts that simulate a fractional mechanical action of the main lift will absolutely contribute. For example, squatting is basically sort of, you can think of it as kind of it's a one-part smooth movement, but it can be broken down into 2 subcomponents. One is the extension of the legs, and the other is the cantilevering of the torso back to its upright position. Because any squat, you're going to bend over a little bit. So if you lever your torso back up and you extend your legs, that's a successful squat. So here's the deal. If you're squatting certain loads and you take some time away from squatting, or you continue squatting just for that neural refinement, but you don't go heavy at all, just technique work, and during that time, you take your hack squat or your leg press and you increase it by 20%, and you take your good morning or stiff-legged deadlift and you increase that by 20%, so we get the leg extension movement and the torso extension movement, of course your fucking squat is going to go up. That's crazy. It would be baffling if it didn't. And sometimes in rare cases it doesn't right away because the neural learning is all off, but as soon as you start squatting relatively heavy again, your squat just goes whoop like that super quick because the underlying movement patterns have been made so much stronger, right? And lastly, and much more obviously, any lifts that come very close to replicating the exact competition lift or specific lift pattern that you're doing, do a damn good job of increasing. For example, the ultimate example here is if you don't do low bar squats or arched back super retracted benches, but you spend months doing high bar squats and you get a lot stronger, and flat back benches, your bench and squat, low bar and competition style bench, will absolutely go up. And again, small chance that they don't go up right away, but as soon as you start practicing again, they exponentially accelerate into crazy gains because the underlying muscle strength and really similar motor patterns are all there. So if you say like, dude, you got to bench to get a bigger bench, that's actually just not true through at least 3 of these ways. Now, what is the best approach in the end? Because we don't want to do extremes. We want to have a decent approach that is sort of sustainable, uses the lifts we want, but maybe doesn't use them all the time. So here's the deal. When you're training for hypertrophy, and we're talking about specifically in strength, let's say powerlifting here. When you're doing the hypertrophy phase for powerlifting, you should use the lifts that best transfer to the competition lifts, but that also have the best stimulus to fatigue ratio for hypertrophy of those muscles that you're going to use in the competition lifts. And it can be the competition lifts themselves, but it may very well be, and often are, very close derivatives that are more conducive to hypertrophy training. Things like stiff-legged deadlifts, a bit more of a target on the hamstrings. Deficit deadlifts, close grip benches, front squats, and so on and so forth. Those will probably form the core of your program because they're related enough to the competition lifts that they increase them a bunch, but also they're so conducive to being used in a hypertrophy set and rep paradigm. They don't irritate the joints much. They target specific subsections of muscle that they really are the best to use for hypertrophy. Now, when you're training for basic strength, a lot of the lifts that you're going to use, or all of them, are the ones that transfer best to the competition lifts for sure. Now, maybe the competition lifts themselves, and it often is, but if you can't do the competition lifts, you're going to want to do the next best thing, and that's okay because it still works really well. Not ideally, but really well. So for example, if your shoulders can't take low bar squatting, you can high bar squat your entire strength cycle, and almost certainly your low bar squat will still go up. Not as much as it could have, but a ton. When you're training for peaking, the comp lifts should be included as much as possible because at that point it's a neural learning thing. You're going to be competing with the competition lifts. You got to train the competition lifts. Low bar squats, competition benches, whatever kind of competition deadlift setup you do, that's what you have to be training a lot. Now, if you're too messed up to train them heavy, if you can't do heavy low bar squats, you can do heavy high bar, but if you can, at least train the competition lifts light so that you can get the movement pattern going. Look, ideally you would get the movement pattern and the exposure to heavy weight, but if you can just get one or the other, that's good to go. So if you really can't low bar heavy anymore for some injury reason or something else, What you can do is heavy high bar and have that be your heavy work, but on the lighter technique sessions in your week, and even sometimes after the high bar work is done, a couple of sets of as heavy as you can go safely, sustainably in low bar, so that you get the high force production from high bar squats and you get the technique adaptation from low bar. Now, does that compare favorably to doing your actual main work in low bar squats? No, it's probably not as good, but it's still way better than zero and it will make you stronger. Folks, thank you for tuning in. See you next time.